Hello friends, and welcome. Tonight I shall read for you two stories by Lucy Maud Montgomery. If you enjoy these readings, I would encourage you to subscribe and click the like button. I thank you for your support. And now it is time to unwind. Settle into a comfortable place. Your bed, your chair. After you have settled in, close your eyes and take a deep breath. As you exhale, you can feel yourself getting relaxed. Your muscles loosen, your mind quiets, and a profound sense of peace washes over you. Take another breath. You are safe, you are calm, and at ease. Your day is done. There is nothing left for you to do but to let go and drift to sleep. And so, let us begin these stories. The Wooing of Bessie. When Lawrence Eastman began going to see Bessie Houghton, the Linfield people shrugged their shoulders and said he might have picked out somebody a little younger and prettier. But then, of course, Bessie was well off. A 200-acre farm and a substantial bank account were worth going in for. Trust an Eastman for knowing up which side his beard was buttered. Lawrence was only 20 and looked even younger, owing to his smooth, boyish face, curly hair, and half-girlish bloom. Bessie Houghton was in reality no more than 25, but Linfield people had the impression that she was past 30. She had always been older than her years, a quiet, reserved girl who dressed plainly and never went about with other young people. Her mother had died when Bessie was very young, and she had always kept house for her father. Their responsibility made her grave and mature. When she was 20, her father died, and Bessie was his sole heir. She kept the farm and took the reins of government in her own capable hands. She made a success of it too, which was more than many a man in Linfield had done. Bessie had never had a lover. She had never seemed like other girls, and passed for an old maid when her contemporaries were in the flush of social success and bloom. Mrs. Eastman, Lawrence's mother, was a widow with 2 sons. George, the older, was the mother's favorite, and the property had been willed to him by his father. To Lawrence had been left the few hundreds in the bank. He stayed at home and hired himself to George, thereby adding slowly to his small hoard. He had his eye on a farm in Linfield, but he was as yet a mere boy, and his plans for the future were very vague until he fell in love with Bessie Houghton. In reality, nobody was more surprised over this than Lawrence himself. It had certainly been the last thing in his thoughts on the dark, damp night when he had overtaken Bessie walking home, alone from prayer meeting, and had offered to drive her the rest of the way. Bessie assented and got into his buggy. At first she was very silent, and Lawrence, who was a bashful lad at the best of times, felt tongue-tied and uncomfortable. But presently Bessie, pitying his evident embarrassment, began to talk to him. She could talk well, and Lawrence found himself entering easily into the spirit of her piquant speeches. He had an odd feeling that he had never known Bessie Houghton before. He had certainly never guessed that she could be such good company. She was very different from the other girls he knew. But he decided that he liked the difference. "Are you going to the party at Bailey's tomorrow night?" he asked, as he helped her to alight at her door. "I don't know," she answered. "I'm invited, but I'm all alone, and parties have never been very much in my line." There was a wistful note in her voice, and Lawrence, detecting it, said hurriedly, not giving himself time to get frightened, "Oh, you'd better go to this one, and if you like, I call around and take you." He wondered if she would think him very presumptuous. He thought her voice sounded colder as she said, "I'm afraid that it would be too much trouble for you." "It wouldn't be any trouble at all," he stammered. "I'll be very pleased to take you." In the end, Bessie had consented to go, and the next evening Lawrence called for her in the rose-red autumn dusk. Bessie was ready and waiting. She was dressed in what was for her unusual elegance, and Lawrence wondered why people called Bessie Houghton so plain. Her figure was strikingly symmetrical and softly curved. Her abundant dark brown hair, instead of being parted plainly and drawn back into a prim coil as usual, was dressed high on her head, and a creamy rose nestled amid the becoming puffs and waves. She wore black, as she usually did, but it was a lustrous black silk, simply and fashionably made, with frost-like frills of lace at her firm round throat and dainty wrists. Her cheeks were delicately flushed, and her wood-brown eyes were sparkling under her long lashes. She offered him a half-opened bud for his coat, and pinned it on for him. As he looked down at her, he noticed what a sweet mouth she had, full and red, with a half-childlike curve. The fact that Lawrence Eastman took Bessie Houghton to the Bailey's party made quite a sensation at the festal scene. People nodded and winked and wondered. "An old maid and her money," said Millie Fisk spitefully. Millie, as was well known, had a liking for Lawrence herself. Lawrence began to go with Bessie Houghton regularly after that. In his single-mindedness, he never feared that Bessie would misjudge his motives, or imagine him to be prompted by mercenary designs. He never thought of her riches himself, and it never occurred to him that she would suppose he did. He soon realized that he loved her, and he ventured to hope timidly that she loved him in return. She was always rather reserved, but the few favors that meant nothing from other girls meant a great deal from Bessie. The evenings he spent with her in her pretty sitting room, their moonlight drives over long, satin-smooth stretches of snowy roads, and their walks home from church and prayer meeting under the winter stars, were all so many moments of supreme happiness to Lawrence. Matters had got thus far before Mrs. Eastman got her eyes opened. At Mrs. Tom Bailey's quilting party, an officious gossip took care to inform her that Lawrence was supposed to be crazy over Bessie Houghton, who was, of course, encouraging him simply for the sake of having someone to bow her around, and who would certainly throw him over in the end, since she knew perfectly well that it was her money he was after. Mrs. Eastman was a proud woman, and a determined one. She had always disliked Bessie Houghton, and she went home from the quilting resolved to put an instant stop to all such nonsense on her son's part. "Where is Laurie?" she asked abruptly, as she entered the small kitchen where George Eastman was lounging by the fire. "Out in the stable, grooming up Lady Grey," responded the older son sulkily. "I suppose he's getting off to see Bessie Houghton again. The young fool that he is. Why don't you put a stop to it?" "I am going to put a stop to it," said Mrs. Eastman grimly. "I'd have done it before if I'd known. You should have told me of it if you knew. I'm going out to see Lawrence right now." George Eastman muttered something inaudible as the door closed behind her. He was a short, thick-set man, not in the least like Lawrence, who was 10 years his junior. 2 years previously, he had made a fugitive attempt to pay court to Bessie Houghton for the sake of her wealth, and her decided repulse of his advances was a remembrance that made him grit his teeth yet. He had hated her bitterly ever since. Lawrence was brushing his pet mare's coat until it shone like satin, and whistling Annie Laurie until the rafters rang. Bessie had sung it for him the night before. He could see her plainly still as she had looked then, in her gown of vivid red, a color peculiarly becoming to her, with her favorite laces at wrist and throat, and a white rose in her hair, which was dressed in the high, becoming knot she had always worn since the night he had shyly told her he liked it so. She had played and sung many of the sweet old Scotch ballads for him, and when she had gone to the door with him, he had taken both her hands in his, and, emboldened by the look in her brown eyes, he had stopped and kissed her. Then he had stepped back, filled with dismay at his own audacity. But Bessie had said no word of rebuke, and only blushed hotly crimson. She must care for him, he thought happily, or else she would have been angry. When his mother came in at the stable door, her face was hard and uncompromising. "Laurie," she said sharply, "where are you going again tonight? You were out last night." "Well, Mother, I promise you I wasn't in a bad company. Come now, don't quiz a fellow too close. You are going to dangle after Bessie Houghton again. It's time you were told what a fool you were making of yourself. She's old enough to be your mother. The whole settlement is laughing at you." Lawrence looked as if his mother had struck him a blow in the face. A dull, purplish flush crept over his brow. "This is some of George's work," he broke out fiercely. "He's been setting you on me, has he? Yes, he's jealous, and wanted Bessie himself, but she would not look at him. He thinks nobody knows it, but I do. Bessie marry him, it's very likely. Laurie Eastman, you are daft. George hasn't said anything to me. You surely don't imagine Bessie Houghton would marry you. And if she would, she is too old for you. Now don't you hang around here any longer." "I will," said Lawrence flatly. "I don't care what anybody says. You needn't worry over me. I can take care of myself." Mrs. Eastman looked blankly at her son. He had never defied or disobeyed her in his life before. She had supposed her word would be law. Rebellion was something she had not dreamt of. Her lips tightened ominously, and her eyes narrowed. "You're a bigger fool than I took you for," she said in a voice that trembled with anger. "Bessie Houghton laughs at you everywhere. She knows you're just after her money, and she makes fun." "Prove it," interrupted Lawrence undauntedly. "I'm not going to put any faith in Linfield gossip. Prove it if you can." "I can prove it," Maggie Hatfield told me what Bessie Houghton said to her about you. She said you were a lovesick fool, and she only went with you for a little amusement, and that if you thought you had nothing to do but marry her and hang up your hat there, you'd find yourself vastly mistaken. Possibly, in her calmer moments, Mrs. Eastman might have shrunk from such a deliberate falsehood, although it was said of her in Linfield that she was not one to stick at a lie when the truth would not serve her purpose. Moreover, she felt quite sure that Lawrence would never ask Maggie Hatfield anything about it. Lawrence turned white to the lips. "Is that true, Mother?" he asked huskily. "I've warned you," replied his mother, not choosing to repeat her statement. "If you go after Bessie any more, you can take the consequences." She drew her shawl about her pale, malicious face and left him with a parting glance of contempt. "I guess they'll settle him," she thought grimly. "Bessie Houghton turned up her nose at George, but she shan't make a fool of Lawrence too." Alone in the stable, Lawrence stood staring out at the dull red ball of the winter sun with unseeing eyes. He had implicit faith in his mother, and the stab had gone straight to his heart. Bessie Houghton listened in vain that night for his well-known footfall on the veranda. The next night, Lawrence went home with Millie Fisk from prayer meeting, taking her out from a crowd of other girls under Bessie Houghton's very eyes, as she came down the steps of the little church. Bessie walked home alone. The light burned low in her sitting room, and in the mirror over the mantel she saw her own pale face with its tragic, pain-stricken eyes. Annie Hillis, her help, was out. She was alone in the big house with her misery and despair. She went dizzily upstairs to her own room and flung herself on the bed in the chill moonlight. "It is all over," she said dully. All night she lay there, fighting with her pain. In the wan, grey morning, she looked at her mirrored self with pitying scorn, at the pallid face, the lifeless features, the dispirited eyes, with their bluish circles. "What a fool I have been! To imagine he could care for me," she said bitterly. "He has only been amusing himself with my folly. And to think that I let him kiss me the other night." She thought of that kiss with a pitiful shame. She hated herself for the weakness that could not check her tears. Her lonely life had been brightened by the companionship of her young lover. The youth and girlhood of which fate had cheated her had come to her with love. The future had looked rosy with promise. Now it had darkened with dourness and greyness. Maggie Hatfield came that day to sew. Bessie had intended to have a dark blue silk made up and an evening waist of pale pink cashmere. She had expected to wear the latter at a party which was to come off a fortnight later. And she had got it to please Lawrence, because he had told her that pink was his favorite color. She would have neither it nor the silk made up now. She put them both away and instead brought out an ugly pattern of snuff-brown stuff, bought years before and never used. "But where is your lovely pink, Bessie?" asked the dressmaker. "Aren't you going to have it for the party?" "No, I'm not going to have it made up at all," said Bessie listlessly. "It's too gay for me. I was foolish to think it would ever suit me. This brown will do for a spring suit. It doesn't make much difference what I wear." Maggie Hatfield, who had not been at prayer meeting the night beforehand, knew nothing of what had occurred, looked at her curiously, wondering what Lawrence Eastman could see in her to be as crazy about her as some people said he was. Bessie was looking her oldest and plainest just then, with the hair combed severely back from her pale, dispirited face. "It must be her money he is after," thought the dressmaker. "She looks over 30, and she can't pretend to be pretty. I believe she thinks a lot of him, though." For the most part, Linfield people believed that Bessie had thrown Lawrence over. This opinion was borne out by his woe-begone appearance. He was thin and pale. His face had lost its youthful curves, and looked hard and mature. He was moody and taciturn, and his speech and manner were marked by a new cynicism. In April, a well-to-do storekeeper from an adjacent village began to court Bessie Houghton. He was over 50, and had never been a handsome man in his best days. But Linfield oracles opined that Bessie would take him. She couldn't expect to do any better, they said, and she was looking terribly old and dowdy all at once. In June, Maggie Hatfield went to the Eastmans to sew. The first bit of news she imparted to Mrs. Eastman was that Bessie Houghton had refused Jabez Leah. At least he didn't come to see her any more. Mrs. Eastman twitched her thread viciously. "Bessie Houghton was born an old maid," she said sharply. "She thinks nobody is good enough for her. That is what's the matter. Lawrence got some silly boy notion into his head last winter, but I soon put a stop to that. I always had an idea that Bessie thought a good deal of Lawrence," said Maggie. "She has never been the same since he left off going with her. I was up there the morning after that prayer meeting night people talked so much of, and she looked positively dreadful, as if she hadn't slept a wink the whole night." "Nonsense," said Mrs. Eastman decisively. "She would never think of taking a boy like him when she's turned up her nose at better men. And I didn't want her for a daughter-in-law anyhow. I can't bear her, so I put my foot down in time. Lawrence sulked for a spell, of course, boy fashion, and he's been as fractious as a spoiled baby ever since." "Well, I dare say you're right," assented the dressmaker. "But I must say I had always imagined that Bessie had a great notion of Lawrence. Of course, she's so quiet it is hard to tell. She never says a word about herself." There was an unsuspected listener to this conversation. Lawrence had come in from the field for a drink, and was standing in the open kitchen doorway, within easy earshot of the women's shrill tones. He had never doubted his mother's word at any time in his life, but now he knew beyond doubt that there had been crooked work somewhere. He shrank from believing his mother untrue. Yet where else could the crookedness come in? When Mrs. Eastman had gone to the kitchen to prepare dinner, Maggie Hatfield was startled by the appearance of Lawrence at the low open window of the sitting room. "Mercy me, how you scared me!" she exclaimed nervously. "Maggie," said Lawrence seriously, "I want to ask you a question. Did Bessie Houghton ever say anything to you about me, or did you ever say that she did? Give me a straight answer." The dressmaker peered at him curiously. "No, Bessie never so much as mentioned your name to me," she said, "and I never heard that she did to anyone else. Why?" "Thank you. That was all I wanted to know," said Lawrence, ignoring her question and disappearing as suddenly as he had come. That evening, at moonrise, he passed through the kitchen dressed in his Sunday best. His mother met him at the door. "Where are you going?" she asked querulously. Lawrence looked her squarely in the face with accusing eyes, before which her own quailed. "I'm going to see Bessie Houghton, Mother," he said sternly. and to ask her pardon for believing the lie that has kept us apart so long. Mrs. Eastman flushed crimson and opened her lips to speak, but something in Lawrence's grave, white face silenced her. She turned away without a word, knowing in her secret soul that her youngest born was lost to her forever. Lawrence found Bessie in the orchard under apple trees that were pyramids of pearly bloom. She looked at him through the twilight with reproach and aloofness in her eyes. But he put out his hands and caught her reluctant ones in a masterful grasp. "Listen to me, Bessie. Don't condemn me before you hurt me. I've been to blame for believing falsehoods about you, but I believe them no longer, and I've come to ask you to forgive me." He told his story simply and straightforwardly. In strict justice, he could not keep his mother's name out of it, but he merely said she had been mistaken. Perhaps Bessie understood none the less. She knew what Mrs. Eastman's reputation in Linfield was. "You might have had a little more faith in me," she cried reproachfully. I know. But I was beside myself with pain and wretchedness. Oh, Bessie, won't you forgive me? I love you so. If you send me away, I'll go to the dogs. Forgive me, Bessie." And she did forgive him. "I've loved you from the first, Lawrence," she said, yielding to his kiss. The Parting of Ways. Mrs. Longworth crossed the hotel piazza, descended the steps, and walked out of sight down the shore road with all the grace of motion that lent distinction to her slightest movement. Her eyes were very bright, and an unusual flush stained the pallor of her cheek. Two men who were lounging in one corner of the hotel piazza looked admiringly after her. "She is a beautiful woman," said one. "Wasn't there some talk about Mrs. Longworth and Cunningham last winter?" asked the other. "Yes, they were much together. Still, there may have been nothing wrong. She was old Judge Carmody's daughter, you know. Longworth got Carmody under his thumb in money matters and put the screws on. They say he made Carmody's daughter the price of the old man's redemption. The girl herself was a mere child. I shall never forget her face on her wedding day. But she's been plucky since then, I must say. If she has suffered, she hasn't shown it. I don't suppose Longworth ever ill-treats her. He isn't that sort. He's simply a groveling cad. That's all. Nobody would sympathize much with the poor devil if his wife did run off with Cunningham." Meanwhile, Beatrice Longworth walked quickly down the shore road, her white skirt brushing over the crisp golden grasses by the way. In a sunny hollow among the sandhills, she came upon Stephen Gordon, sprawled out luxuriously in the warm, sea-smelling grasses. The youth sprang to his feet at the sight of her, and his big brown eyes kindled to a glow. Mrs. Longworth smiled to him. They had been great friends all summer. He was a lanky, overgrown lad of 15 or 16, odd and shy and dreamy, scarcely possessing a speaking acquaintance with others at the hotel. But he and Mrs. Longworth had been congenial from their first meeting. In many ways, he was far older than his years, but there was a certain ineradicable boyishness about him to which her heart warmed. "You are the very person I was just going in search of. I've news to tell. Sit down." He spoke eagerly, patting the big grey boulder beside him with his slim brown hand. For a moment Beatrice hesitated. She wanted to be alone just then, but his clever, homely face was so appealing that she yielded and sat down. Stephen flung himself down again contentedly in the grasses at her feet, pillowing his chin in his palms and looking up at her adoringly. "You are so beautiful, dear lady. I love to look at you. Will you tilt that hat a little more over the left eyebrow? Yes, so. Some day I shall paint you." His tone and manner were all simplicity. "When you are a great artist," said Beatrice indulgently. He nodded. "Yes, I mean to be that. I've told you all my dreams, you know. Now for my news. I'm going away tomorrow. I had a telegram from my father today." He drew the message from his pocket and flourished it up at her. "I'm to join him in Europe at once. He is in Rome. Think of it, in Rome. I'm to go on with my art studies there, and I leave tomorrow." "I'm glad, and I'm sorry, and you know which is which," said Beatrice, patting the shaggy brown head. "I shall miss you dreadfully, Stephen." "We have been splendid chums, haven't we?" he said eagerly. Suddenly his face changed. He crept nearer to her and bowed his head until his lips almost touched the hem of her dress. "I'm glad you came down today," he went on in a low, diffident voice. "I want to tell you something, and I can tell it better here. I couldn't go away without thanking you. I'll make a mess of it. I can never explain things. But you've been so much to me. You mean so much to me. You've made me believe in things I never believed in before. I know now that there is such a thing as a good woman. A woman who could make a man better, just because he breathed the same air with her." He paused for a moment, then went on in a still lower tone. "It's hard when a fellow can't speak of his mother because he can't say anything good of her, isn't it? My mother wasn't a good woman. When I was 8 years old, she went away with a scoundrel. It broke Father's heart. Nobody thought I understood. I was such a little fellow. But I did. I heard them talking. I knew she had brought shame and disgrace on herself and us. And I had loved her so. Then, somehow, as I grew up, it was my misfortune that all the women I had to do with were mean and base. They were hirelings, and I hated and feared them. There was an aunt of mine. She tried to be good to me in her way, but she told me a lie, and I never cared for her after I found it out. And then Father. We loved each other and were good chums. But he didn't believe in much either. He was bitter, you know. He said all women were alike. I grew up with that notion. I didn't care much for anything. Nothing seemed worthwhile. Then I came here and met you." He paused again. Beatrice had listened with a grey look on her face. It would have startled him had he glanced up, but he did not, and after a moment's silence, the halting boyish voice went on. "You have changed everything for me. I was nothing but a clod before. You are not the mother of my body, but you are of my soul. I was born of you. I shall always love and reverence you for it. You will always be my ideal. If I ever do anything worthwhile, it will be because of you. In everything I shall ever attempt, I shall try to do it as if you were to pass judgment upon it. You will be a lifelong inspiration to me. Oh, I'm bungling this. I can't tell you what I feel. You are so pure, so good, so noble. I shall reverence all women for your sake henceforth." "And if," said Beatrice in a very low voice, "if I were false to your ideal of me, if I were to do anything that would destroy your faith in me, something weak or wicked—" "But you couldn't," he interrupted. flinging up his head and looking at her with his great dog-like eyes. "You couldn't." "But if I could," she persisted, gently. "And if I did, what then?" "I should hate you," he said passionately. "You would be worse than a murderess. You would kill every good impulse and believe in me. I would never trust anything or anybody again. But there," he added, his voice once more growing tender, "you will never fail me. I feel sure of that." "Thank you," said Beatrice, almost in a whisper. "Thank you," she repeated after a moment. She stood up and held out her hand. "I think I must go now. Goodbye, dear laddie. Write to me from Rome. I shall always be glad to hear from you, wherever you are. And I shall always try to live up to your ideal of me, Stephen." He sprang to his feet and took her hand, lifting it to his lips with boyish reverence. "I know that," he said slowly. "Goodbye, my sweet lady." When Mrs. Longworth found herself in her room again, she unlocked her desk and took out a letter. It was addressed to Mr. Maurice Cunningham. She slowly tore it twice across, laid the fragments on a tray, and touched them with a lighted match. As they blazed up, one line came out in writhing redness across the page. "I will go away with you as you ask." Then it crumbled into grey ashes. She drew a long breath and hid her face in her hands.